Okay, well, I can't see folks on my screen, but I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Um, I deal with conservation and recovery of our salmon steelhead populations, and the reason I put this presentation together is kind of a junction of many different pieces. There's actually an action in our plan that says ODFW should conduct a detailed climate change risk analysis and try to help inform folks on what's going to happen in watersheds in the future so that they could look down the road a little bit and maybe think about how they address um, climate change mitigation, or at least have that in their thought process as going on. A lot of folks are like, all of a sudden, we got to dial in on this climate change piece. Well, yeah, you do, but don't always put all those eggs in one basket, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But I put this presentation together a while ago um, because of the action in the plan. And then ODFW has done, and you'll see some results of this, of a downscaled climate action plan or climate assessment that looks at the future for water temperatures and flows. And I'm not going to really touch on the flows today. It's going to be more water temperature because we already know that's an issue in the Scappoose population. And so we didn't do our assessment at the Scappoose level. We did it at the evolutionary significant unit level, which basically is all fish populations from Hood River down to Young's Bay. And so all those populations between was part of this. And so you'll see some larger scale maps that will cover the whole issue, but you can see basically some of the baseline and changes that are going to occur in the Scappoose. And then lastly, I also took a climate academy um, course with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this was kind of my final project. And I knew that this was thinking about doing a strategic action plan, and then also I knew that if you actually look at when you see the results, the biggest change is not going to occur in the Scappoose, but some of the more drastic results will be probably realized in the Scappoose population because we have existing pretty severe temperature problems already occurring in the basin. And so you'll see a couple slides I'll go over pretty quickly because they're not all that germane. I had to put this together for the course, but this one really, the main piece in here is the pace and scale of climate change actions insufficient to tackle the climate change issues that are going on right now. And there was a lot of focus on this, on how to carry these messages out to the general public. But I'm not going to sit on this one too much. And then this is kind of an important slide here that I wanted to share because this is kind of where I believe this process is that we're talking about today, about potentially updating a strategic action plan. And that hope is a process and well-being is that outcome. But in order to have the hope, you have to set some goals, which kind of were between the goals, such as I don't want salmon steelhead to disappear in the Scappoose. Then you develop the roadmap, which is kind of what we're talking about today. And then you have to have the willpower, which comes with the people and the finances to do the work that you wanted to do on the habitat piece. And so I'm moving forward to some of the results from our assessment. And so what the reason I put this one in is this kind of tells you, so ODFW did this climate assessment, and the regional concentration pathways are the way you can look at how long it is before greenhouse gas emissions drop to a certain level to where they're no longer severely impacting the environment. And the bottom line in the dark green is like if we cut everything off already, um, and the greenhouse gases go down to zero relatively quickly, versus the top one where business as usual. Worst case scenario, they don't go down until the 21st century. And so the difference between the lines is when you project out in climate change impacts, depending on which one you pick, the lower one you're going to have the least change, and the top one you're going to have the most change. depending on which one. And right now we're kind of on the track to of the 8.5, which is the top one. You don't see a line in there for RCP6, which would be slightly below that orange line. And the RCP6 is really the one that ODFW used to model future impacts across the ESU. And so that's why that one's in there. So here is some of the results of our climate change assessment. And so the top verbiage is just about, if we continue at our current levels, air temperature is going to go up by up to 8 degrees by the 2080s. And we're going to see the largest increase in the summer. The graphic below is something I wanted to point at. A couple of things on here I wanted to point your attention on. And so this is the baseline temperature that ODFW used to look at what our current conditions are. And you see they use data from 2002 to 2011. And that comes from the Northwest Stream temperature modeling that I believe gets information from some of the work that everybody does, and it gets passed up through different agencies, and they collect it. The second thing is this is that I see as maybe a little bit of a flaw in terms of absolute fish uses. They look at the maximum weekly maximum stream temperature. And so that is at any point in time over the course of summer, did your water temperature basically increase more than 20 degrees C? And you can see on your bottom left is what your current baseline temperatures are in the Scappoose population. Looking at the Scappoose bottomlands, you're seeing that, we already know that those approach like 30 degrees C or 30 degrees C in the summertime. And then you have temperature impairments, on the main stem and south, probably up to Raymond. And then on the north up to the Bonnie Falls, and on Milton almost all the way up to the city of St. Helens Forest. And so that's what the current conditions are. It's tough to see the difference at this scale on what the future conditions are, and I'll show you here in a minute. And you also need to realize that this scale changes a little bit when you see the next slide. So you can see that the temperature scale has changed a little bit, and there's not a drastic, it's hard to see some of the major changes. The big question in my mind is, where is, right now we know that you have stream temperature impacts during the summertime anyway, that eliminate fish use in the lower South Scappoose, lower North, and Milton drainages. How far will that move up over time? Is the maximum weekly maximum temperature the absolute best model, or would it be better to use like a 7-day average maximum? I don't know the answer to that, but it's just something to think about. And then obviously the top verbiage is that stream temperatures under current scenarios are going to move up by 7 degrees C, or about 31% increase of what they are now. And then the bottom verbiage is basically what ODFW used. They called it basically it's that we use this estimates from the Northwest Stream temperature model. This next slide here is kind of more of a tabular description of what things are going to be like. And I would draw your attention to the area that's highlighted on the Scappoose. And so the second column over here is the historical stream length in kilometers that was available for anadromous fish. And then going across the top here, you can see the total stream length that's less than 20 degrees. So that's your maximum weekly temperature, maximum weekly maximum temperature. And so what they're saying is under baseline conditions, only 68 kilometers stays below that 20 degrees C mark year round. And then it goes by into 2040, that will drop down to 25 kilometers. In 2080, it will drop down to 13. And then the next three columns are the percentages that it goes down. So at baseline level, we're only at 23% of the historical kilometers may stay below 20 degrees C. And by 2080s, it's going to drop down to 4% of the basin. I included the picture or figure to the right to kind of show this is from the existing strategic action plan that kind of show where basically fish cannot use during the summer months. So that is all no longer available habitat for any juveniles wishing to rear. And here's your south. That's about Raymond Creek. North is Bonnie Falls, and this goes almost up to the city of St. Helens water supply forest. I'm sorry. This is just a quick reference to where and how. I didn't do this work. We have folks in our research department that actually did the climate change assessment. I did provide Rachel with a copy. It's not officially finalized. It will be coming out with our 12-year assessment of our recovery plan. That's supposed to be, it keeps getting delayed, but we're predicting now this summer will be available for the public review. But this is kind of a reference to where we got the information from. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. This is basically NOAA did an assessment of climate change vulnerability on all salmon populations that are in the California current, which is California through Washington. And they looked at things like biological sensitivity, exposure, and whether how much adaptive capacity they have. And so you can imagine that a coho salmon that's in there that has to have a year-round freshwater residence time is going to be more impacted than, say, a fish that's like a Chinook that would leave the basin after basically 90 days or less. They're fast migrating. Or if you had a summer migrating population, which we really don't, those would be facing warmer water temperatures. And then exposure has to do with duration. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because there's only really two populations that we're talking about in the Scappoose. It would be steelhead, which is an unlisted population, and then lower Columbia River coho. And you can see from this chart over here that NOAA used to rank for priorities on dealing with climate change impacts across the ESU. You can see that due to the exposure time frame of coho juveniles, they rank up here into the high exposure and sensitivity rank, and they do have a moderate in the adaptive capacity, and that has to do more with the number of fish that we actually have, or how close to viability we are for Columbia River coho. And then off to the right, I just wanted to show you the number of fish that have returned. These are natural origin fish to the Scappoose population over time. It's averaging around 1,000 fish. 2022 jumped up a little bit more. And then I wanted to show you the steelhead numbers, which are looking pretty bad. Here's your existing strategic action plan. This is your the matrix. And I would encourage you to think about how you might weave climate change pieces into your decision-making process. I don't know exactly where it would fit, but I think it would be a good discussion. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but by virtue of prioritizing, you are following the decision support network that the Department of Interior uses in terms of either mitigating the impacts of climate change or accepting them, like you might decide to do for like Jackson Creek if that's not a priority for you. Direct is something we really don't want to talk about because that would be accepting the change and creating habitat for other invasive species or species that might colonize the basin. I don't think that's a matter of discussion unless we want to hash that out later. And so as I'm getting down to a spot where we're going to talk about actions. And so what I wanted to show you with this is a reference that we use in other watershed councils on prioritizing climate actions. And so this is what NOAA did in this report is they looked at a variety of different habitat restoration actions, and they asked, do they ameliorate the impacts of temperature increases, flow, a number of different things, and I'll show you those in a minute, but this is just a reference to this. But we do use this in other areas in the ESU to prioritize restoration. And here is one of the big important pieces uh, of that reference I just showed you. And you can see up here on the top row, ameliorates impacts to temperature increases, base flow decreases, peak flow increases, and increasing salmon resilience. And some of the top actions you can see here are basically connectivity. And you can see some of the actions, and then they rate them across there. And so longitudinal connectivity is allowing fish to move up and down the stream network. Lateral connectivity is about making connections to the floodplain. Vertical connectivity is about raising the bed of your stream channel to allow basically lateral connectivity. And then you can see some of the things down here towards the bottom are riparian functions and in-stream habitat. I would not, and the other thing that I would mention in this category is this ameliorates temperature increases, and I think that's going to be the biggest challenge that's faced to the Scappoose. Obviously, base flow decreases and peak flow increases will be a concern, but I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to be looking at here. So let's talk a little bit about potential strategies. And what I was thinking, and what our 2022 climate change analysis said at the SU level, we're going to be changing our primary limiting factor of winter habitat towards summer habitat. But one of the interesting things is clear back in 2012, under the limiting factor assessment that TRAS did for the Scappoose population, it already said summer habitat was the primary limiting factor. And a couple of thoughts that I had that you might choose to think about in the future is doing a climate assessment of your own at the Scappoose level, which would give you a little more clarity on what things might look like than what we have right now. And then maybe even looking at the 7-day average maximum temperature as opposed to the maximum weekly maximum temperature that might give you more of an idea of what your fish use might look like in the summertime. Now, to talk about some of these pieces that you might think about in the future, when I think of longitudinal connectivity, I wonder, is there a location where it might be best to focus some idea and maybe even look at some culverts that were never looked at in the future just due to their size or their minimal amount of fish use. And so this is just one example, and I'm not advocating to going here, but there is also an action in our plan to look at small tributaries that are blocked where fish could access cold water. And so this was part of an exercise I did a few years ago, and I worked with Pat Welly on this. And this is one spot where I measured stream temperature on Alder Creek. And the temperature up there during the summertime didn't get above 66 degrees, but yet at the CZ corridor there, or their trail, there is a double barrel culvert with an outlet dropping that would prevent juveniles from moving up into this area. It is listed as an anadromous fish use, but it's pretty small. I don't think it met anybody's radar originally. But these are examples where maybe a new strategy or new thoughts on where priority should be for culvert replacement. Lateral connectivity. This is another one. The top two pictures, and I'm not necessarily promoting stage zero restoration, although it is a good concept. This is about moving water out on the floodplain so that it soaks up during the wintertime. In the summertime, it's released slower and keeps water temperature cooler. And this is just the top two are before and after pictures of the South Fork of the McKenzie River down below Cougar Dam. In the bottom right is just a picture of a project that the Scappoose Watershed Council did. This is a back channel that on Milton Creek. I've not had a chance to look at this in the summertime, but over time, it's just going to it's access to off-channel habitat, and I think it will continue to improve and look even better over time and provide functions for summer habitat as well as winter habitat. And then I'm not advocating particularly for this spot, but when you look at looking at a potential spot, I see, and I don't know what the landowner interest is in here, but you've got the whole Dutch Canyon area that could improve, a good place to improve lateral connectivity. The pins in there were temperature monitoring stations that I wanted to do last year that didn't get the chance to do. But again, if those culverts or their structure in there, those might be places that we might be interested in doing culvert work in the future, because this is probably, if this is just above Raymond Creek, and if the temperatures increase in the future, they're going to be pushing up into this area. And this might be an area where you might be keenly interested in resisting those changes and allowing fish to move into some of those cool water tributaries, assuming they're cool water. I haven't done the temperature measurements on those. And then the vertical connectivity piece, that's going to be much more difficult, especially in certain locations. But one avenue to think about this is that when we're out doing restoration, whether we're out trying to increase stream capacity or whatever, we should be considering at least where landowners are showing interest of improving habitat, particularly if we want to look at beaver and look at some of the what they call intrinsic potential habitat for beaver, which has already been done to a degree. We should be thinking about putting beaver forage out, or maybe even doing beaver dam analogs to encourage beaver to reoccupy certain areas. And again, this is the limiting factor assessments on the right. Trask already identified areas of high intrinsic beaver habitat that we should be considering putting, improving habitat conditions for beaver to encourage them to recolonize. Again, this is going to need landowner support, but these areas are somewhat already defined. Riparian function workshops. We've already heard that there's an interest within the Scappoose Council to increase that. I strongly encourage that. And one of the pieces I wanted to point out was that over in the John Day, they used the ODEQ heat source model to look at if we really go out and really do a lot of riparian restoration in an area, can we make a difference? And the answer was yes. They were able to drop temperatures anywhere between 1 to 2.5 degrees C, depending on how much they put in. They weren't able to recover the entire area, but they were able to recover in terms of summer stream temperature significant amount of areas. And so that should be strongly encouraged and looking at growing. The other point I wanted to point out, or there's a couple left here that I want to point out in this, is that in looking at a future climate change, management options can make a difference, and those management options can come in positive or negative. And so I just wanted to, another thing that the council could consider is becoming more of a public voice. I'm not certain how often it occurs, but being a public voice for issues that come up, and one of them came up recently within the county of Columbia County, where they removed riparian protection ordinances on what they call non-fish streams. It actually happens to be 50% of the streams within the basin, but that it will be a negative impact when you look at future climate change. So it's being a voice, if you're able to. I know that's more difficult when you become a nonprofit, but that is something that is another option that you might consider. And then I also would point out a spot that might be a good riparian restoration area is this area at Fraze Lane. I did a little temperature monitoring, and the temperature does increase significantly here. But the reason I put this on here is just downstream of here is an area that we predict will be resilient to a degree in the future to climate change. And we've done probably 6 miles of stream restoration just below this. And by having some of this warm water coming into an area where we're trying to hold more fish in the upper watershed is kind of is not the best scenario to have. And so I don't know landowner interest, but this would be areas where you might consider focusing riparian work in the future. This is the very last slide, and this is kind of a discussion about, we know where some of the core areas are, and I'm currently working with Rachell and some folks to potentially implement some restoration work in here. And so this is about taking some of the core areas and trying to increase our habitat capacity to hold more fish in these areas where we know that they can persist into the future. And so my thoughts are is these core areas, we need to basically try to increase capacity so that fish that are coming from other areas lower in the watershed could access this area and hold. Or if it becomes an area that has too many juvenile fish, we're increasing capacity so we can try to hold more fish in those areas. And so part of our strategies and thoughts are is removing barriers within this area so that fish can move around in these, and increasing habitat capacity and looking at riparian vegetation where we need to, and beaver habitat. And so this is another strategy that could be employed by looking at the small area that we know is going to be core, and then maybe moving down and looking at resisting in areas like Dutch Canyon or somewhere in the north, Scappoose or Milton, and try to push some of that temperatures that are going to increase moving upstream. There's a number of strategies that could be employed, but I just wanted to share with you all some of these thoughts, and just to at least get the conversation begun on to think about what those conditions are going to be in the future and maybe try to address some of those. And with that, we will move it out to Rachel and either open up for questions or proceed to next steps.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I will ask if anybody has any questions of you before we move forward with my part of the discussion. All
Looks
right.
like Andrea has her hand up.
I think
Or
she was
is that a clap? I can't tell. Okay. So
I was trying to clap. It didn't look like it moved at all. So
no, it did. It yeah, that's why I was super confused.
thank you,
Jim,
Andrea.
I do have a question. Obviously, as the role you have with ODFW, you're primarily focused on impacts to fish populations and things like that. But it's with the clear temperature regime that we're looking at. I'm curious if you could go into or had a sense, or if others on the call had a sense of like what other, not only will that have impacts on fish population, but what other issues could arise in the watershed due to increasing stream temperatures. I'm thinking like bacterial regimes, or, are there other things we should be contemplating as issues that might arise here related to the watershed?
I'd mention a couple, Andy, and I'm interested with some of the other folks because, like you said, I have a strong focus on the fish population. We do know we have an endemic parasite called sea Shasta, and sea Shasta does impact all fish populations. We have, I think I don't know if it's the ecotype. There's 2 or 3 different strains, and they all affect different fish populations, and they're all present. And as the water temperature warms, the density gets thicker in the water column. And as, say, if you have a springtime migration and your water warms up earlier, then those fish moving through there are going to be exposed to higher densities of spores and more get infected, which basically will affect the population and returns. And so that is something that we've kicked around, particularly with our chum program. We did some measurements across the coastal strata, including the Scappoose. The other one that I haven't seen yet, and luckily, and I don't know how this might play out, but we're also seeing harmful algal blooms going off pretty regularly now in the Willamette River. And those are associated with lower flows in the summertime and higher stream temperatures. I don't know if it's a possibility, but that would be maybe somewhat of a question I have for Scappoose Bay in the future.
And then Gail Sykes in the chat asked a question, is there a correlation between flow and temperature?
Good question. I don't know if I can. Well, in the simple evidence, yes, because you have less flow, you're going to have less surface area, and you're going to have more area exposed to solar radiation, particularly rocks. So I would say that you're going to have some, but I don't recall us really looking at it from that perspective. The one that concerns me more is by having less flow in the summer, you're having less pool area to hold less fish. But I don't know. I don't know for certain about the correlation or the details of the correlation between stream temperature and future stream temperature and future stream flow.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again and we'll get the discussion underway. Here we go. So we are looking at the strategies to incorporate climate change into our strategic action plan. And so this is kind of where I wanted to start opening up this discussion to our partners. Where are we going to tell this climate story in our current strategic action plan? We've bounced this around just between myself, Andy, and Nicole, but I think that this would pose a really good question because we're looking at it as a standalone section, or should we incorporate it into our other sections and look at all of the impacts that climate change would have on our current limiting factor analysis and anything in the future? And so are we looking at, you know, a standalone section or redoing our plan and incorporating it throughout? What are your thoughts on this? Did anyone have any current thoughts? Yeah, Andrea, go ahead.
Sure. I don't have, real specific thoughts about it, but I guess it's when you think about trying to orientate the strategic action plan around climate change, would you do anything different? Like, we know that we might have higher stream temperatures, higher air temperatures, lower flow, potentially more wildfires and stuff like that. That could impact streamside shade and stuff like that. So, like, I'm just trying to think, like, what would be the intention of doing that? Would you identify different areas because they're more susceptible because of climate change, or generally the whole area is still susceptible to climate change? You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to think of what, I'm not expressing myself very well, but just trying to think of what would be the objective.
I think, Andrea, one of the, speaking from some of the internal discussions that we've had, I think you're hitting on something that definitely we've addressed, or not addressed, but one, I think it is sort of why we're raising this question, because if you that initial articulation you made is like, if you reoriented, what would look different, right? Because what actually I think initially spurred at least my pointing out, like, hey, this plan doesn't talk about climate change, is like, when you look at a lot of the prescriptive actions that the plan calls out for, right? Shading streams, which helps temperature along, some of the other like restoration work, like Jim was pointing out, some of the different connectivity regimes that we could look to employ and things like that. It's all pointing towards different cause, right? But like, we probably end up with a lot of those same actions in a climate-oriented plan anyway, which is like, I think why our question is like, or maybe not our question is, but like, instead of reorienting, is this adding climate to the story really more than anything else? And like, some of the issues we're facing are driven by climate. There are other things that are causing those issues that we should have some lens around, right? That I think the plan currently calls out. But it was that point that like nothing is really pointing to climate, and like maybe it's time we point some of this to climate because those challenges are just exacerbating because of it.
Well,
So I think you framed that really articulately, Andrea. Actually, that was really great.
yeah, and I think that this poses to, you know, a lot of our strategic action plan utilizes a lot of different methods for restoration, but it does look at the latitude method, or looking at, you know, reconnecting floodplains, but we don't have that longitudinal aspect of connectivity that I think that we could definitely incorporate more, that would help salmon have access to cool water refugia more readily, or, you know, lessening those barriers. We do have quite a bit in our strategic action plan for barrier removal, but I think that telling a different story, or in a that climate lens, might just bring about a better picture, overall picture of what we're seeing, of the reasons why things are so important. And so we've been working on reviewing our strategic action plan. And so these are some of the questions that we had while we've been working on this. Our board, some of our board members and myself have been getting together, and we're really looking at moving forward and working towards getting a draft ready. And these are some of the questions that we have in our review. And I wanted to pose to see, you know, if any of these questions resonated with you, if there are any things that you guys would add into this plan. You know, we are looking at current data gaps and what that might look like. And there are some things that the board is feeling pretty strongly about moving forward with, including a shader streams assessment, and then looking at water quality monitoring in the area. There is currently water quality monitoring going on where we partner with the Soil and Water Conservation District and LSEP, but looking at things differently, that might be more long-term. Hi, Susie, go ahead. Sorry, Susie Dahl, did you have your hand up? Did you have a question? I can't hear you. I can see your mouth moving though. I think you're trying to talk. Well, I will finish and say that that water quality monitoring is moving, looking at finishing it around a 10-year mark, and that'll be more looking like a water quality assessment with a number of different factors that are contributing to that. And I think looking at a more long-term plan of vast, wider temperature monitoring with grab sampling of E. coli is a plan for the future for the watershed. But I wanted to see if any of our partners felt like there were any other gaps or any other dots that we should be looking at connecting in this plan as well.
Susie's going to try again.
I think so. I see her. Oh, there is our chat. But oh, yep, there we go. that over though. Oh, have we reached out to the Oregon Department of Agriculture? We are currently working with the Columbia Soil and Water Conservation District and the West Monoma Soil and Water Conservation District. Both are starting working with the Oregon Department of Agriculture and doing SIAs, which are Strategic Action Implementation Plans. Those are looking at water quality monitoring throughout or any water quality conflicts throughout the counties. So I know both the Columbia Soil and Water Conservation District will be looking at the North and South Scappoose Forks for their section of the SIA, and then West Multnomah is looking at the whole of Sauvie Island, with which both fall within our parameters. So we are going to be working in tandem with them. But I could reach out in regards to our SAP specifically as well. Oh, restoration grants for shade and passing flyers to property owners. That will be encompassed in the outreach component of the SIAs. We'll be working with landowners to get more riparian areas shaded. Landowners that have ag land have to meet certain requirements, and that's a part of the SIA. So we'll be working really closely with them as those things unfold. So I will keep my eyes out for some of if there are any grants as well. It's a really good option there. So looking at the current issues and conditions, agriculture practices are some of the causes. We do have a lot of timber landowners in the area, residential and industrial development, construction of roads and impervious surfaces. I think a lot of the city infrastructure is going to just increase as, our population increases and we get a more robust economy. There are more building and things happening. And so we're currently looking at, what that is going to cause. It's going to cause degradation and then issues and more limiting factors within these areas. Erin. Oh, it's good to see you.
You too. Hi, everybody. I just kind of, with some of the causes that you just thought, I was reflecting back on something that Jim said in his presentation, where he sort of pointed to like the, watershed counselors' participation in some of the like regulatory decisions or government level decisions that are being made, such as the Columbia County one around the riparian setbacks. And I would actually, rather than just like sort of when you have these causes or issues that are happening, rather than just speaking directly to them, I'm wondering if more of like an ongoing discussion with, city council people or board of commissioners would be helpful, because I kind of feel like if you're regularly going into talking to them, whatever that looks like, right? Whether that's once a year or twice a year, whatever, and you're sort of like sharing your narrative and what you're seeing and what you're thinking, and you're bringing them along, that when they're at the table or in the room talking about these other decisions that may be being driven by other industries or, people that have, input or whatever, that they're kind of thinking about the stuff that they've already heard from you guys, right? And so you're not necessarily coming in as a response to an issue saying, hey, what about this? Like, don't do this thing because it's going to affect this, but that you're more educating them along the way. I think that maybe could be helpful, because I know that when, I was working with the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, that's how we are approaching some of the stuff around the E. coli, where we really started with just educating them around the problem. And then as we came to them in successive manners, wanting like them to participate or do actions and some of the things that we are trying to implement to address the problem or understand it better, we were able to bring them along a lot better. And they seemed like more willing to like hear those voices or make those decisions because they already had kind of like been up to speed on what was happening.
Absolutely. I feel like we're starting to really get back on track with some of those things, but really keeping the education going and the conversations going. I know a number of our board members continue to keep conversations going with a number of the county commissioners, and we do present once a year, and maybe I could look at increasing that or really trying to just keep the conversation going. I know I feel like my that I am trying to keep that rapport going with a number of our city officials, and keeping both the cities, the county, and our political officers informed as I can. But I feel like there definitely could be more education and more conversations happening and continuing to happen. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, and I think I would also suggest, right, that like framing it in a certain way, right, where Jim definitely has an interest in, and what he studies and how it impacts the fish. But if we can also like look at these things that you care about and that are causing these problems, but we can frame them or relate them in a way to some of the other things that the county cares about, then
Yeah.
I think you just, right, you sort of are able, and I mean, some of this is probably like, no duh, like that's pretty obvious, but I think you have to be really intentional about those things because, if you start explaining it in a way like, oh, this is actually really going to impact development or economics or recreation or whatever, in addition to the fish, in addition to these other things that matter, then you're kind of really sort of presenting the narrative in a different way that all of a sudden gets them thinking about it just a little bit differently, where it's not just a fish problem, it's like it's something that's actually really impacting a lot of other things.
Yeah, it's an erosional problem where, we're going to see more flooding, more damage to different things, what will impact the city overall. No, that totally makes sense. That's great.
Yeah. And if they're already spending money, right, on these things, then, consider this stuff so that you're not just throwing money down the drain. Yeah, I think you just really, you have to talk to especially political people in that sort of way, so that they can think about it in other terms.
Yeah. And then I just, we wanted to put this up. This is some of our resources that we have pooled for our strategic action plan. And what we've completed, and we're ready, and how we're going to be drafting the strategic action plan, all of the changes, and assessing data gaps. One of the things that we addressed previously was a comprehensive road assessment focused on fine sediment issues, and a comprehensive assessment of thermal conditions. So we are looking at moving forward with a shade assessment, and trying to combine it with an updated thermal measure. That won't be included though in this SAP update, but it will be. We are hoping to start that process so it can be included in future SAP, in a future SAP update. And so conservation needs have been outlined are large woody debris and beaver dams and streams. So just increasing the pooling in these streams for water retention and habitat creation, the floodplain and stream reconnections, and increased stream channel complexity, increased complexity of riparian vegetation, reduced lower watershed stream temperatures, and outreach education and landowner engagement. So these are all things that we are actively looking at. one of the things to add is, in looking at connectivity and reconnection, increasing access to cool water. And apologize. Our prioritized strategies and actions are improved degraded and salmon habitat and access, including access and connectivity throughout the watersheds, improving overall water quality, reducing invasive species, and focusing on land management issues that focus on protecting and restoring our watershed and creating a healthy watershed. And so here are some of the outcomes and priority actions. Looking at a database of the stream reaches and prioritization, increase the number of stream miles and with improved habitat, an ongoing funded program that continues in-stream habitat restoration. These are some of the things that we're currently looking into, and then our priority actions are to create a database of stream reaches, increase the number of stream miles with added large wood and riparian vegetation, focus on our priority reaches, establish an ongoing program to continue expanding the number of stream miles treated, and establish multiple sources of large wood. And we're looking at improving water quality. A number of the actions are continuing to do some of the same things. We're continuing to target projects that will reduce stream temperatures, measurable reduction in stream temperature, and lower monitoring stations. So continuing to expand on water quality monitoring. We want to get into the lower reaches as well as the upper reaches, but continuing to expand so we have a larger temperature base that we're looking at for looking at those 7-day maximums, and just looking at how things are currently being affected within our watershed, as well as specific identification of water quality concerns. There are some current water quality concerns that we continue to find and we continue to try to look at, but for our SAP, we're wanting to look at things that we're wanting to prioritize and create with priority actions. And reducing invasive species is a large priority for the Watershed Council. And so these things also will help in a number of ways, but we want to reduce trend of numbers of acres infested with Japanese knotweed and garlic mustard and other key invasives, and we continue to monitor things coming in and out of the watershed, increase the local knowledge about the impacts of invasive species and the benefits of native vegetation, and establish a program of invasive species eradication focused on highly sensitive locations and feasibility of controlling a species. And the priority actions are to secure continued funding for established invasive eradication programs, identify priority species and/or area that can be addressed with measurable results, and increased secured level of funding for native plant propagation, education, and outreach. Focus on land management issues that focus on protecting and restoring healthy watersheds. The outcomes, a cooperative working relationship with local government and community leaders, attention to natural resources and restoration actions with community planning actions, and increased awareness by local government and community methods to include natural resource restoration in long-term development. And this is where we tie things back into you. We want to discuss our strategic action plan with our local government and community leaders, our advisory board, our partnerships, and continue looking at overlapping areas of concern and interest, and to develop joint projects, focus on locations where increased population densities encroach on sensitive riparian, in-stream, and other habitat areas. And Andrea chimed in and stated in the chat, a shade assessment will be very helpful for the Willamette Subbasin's temperature TMDL that's currently out for public comment. We know what the effective shade should be for the Scappoose watershed to meet water quality standards for temperature, but not what the existing effective shade is. And here's this prioritization matrix. Just throwing this out there again, this is the way that we're currently looking at things in our strategic action plan. I did like Jim's comment, and I would, pose this to the advisory board, excuse me, as well as how we should look at prioritizing the priorities of the council and our strategic action plan for projects and priorities in the watershed. And did anybody have any thoughts on this?
Rachel, to me, it almost seems like you already have all the elements in here. It's how you define your axes. So, like, you could define like where are priority locations in your watershed to implement actions for climate change mitigation. You could define, habitat actions that might be the best, or the size is not going to change so much. But so that's kind of where I'm looking at, is you already have this. It's a matter of how do you define the pieces under a climate change lens.
So our overall vision is to provide a healthy watershed that offers the community a place to live, work, and play, where natural beauty, recreational opportunities, and clean surroundings are available for everyone. And the strategic approach, the consolidation of information and prioritization of actions and stream reaches, combined with increased public outreach and strengthened management partnerships, is an ideal opportunity to significantly increase the pace of watershed restoration. And these are some of our next steps. We want to continue to hear from everybody in this group. We're going to look at going over everything we talked about today, and we'll send a survey asking some questions. And we will be looking for volunteers to help address specific sections or questions of this plan, and we'll follow up. And please let us know if you guys are interested in digging a little deeper into any of these things that are listed. And then, Andy, did you get your audio back? I think he's working. Did anybody have any other questions or anything that they wanted to add?
I would just say thanks, Rachel, for putting this presentation on. And I really like the idea of the next steps. We just went to a lot of information, and in a short time frame. And so I think hopefully you'll get some good feedback on the next steps when you send out those surveys.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jim, for continuing to be a part of the conversations. And then Andy, your mic is back. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to say thanks. And this was sort of the idea with today was to set up this conversation and then provide some more structured ways for you to think a little bit more. But I also know from previous conversations with many people on this call that there are a lot of ideas out there for what we ought to be working on in the watershed and what the work might need to look like for us all collectively. So I know you're all not shy, but we'll get your feedback. We'll get your feedback.
And then Gail had asked what the timeline is for updating the SAP. So Andy, myself, Nicole have currently been working on the strategic action plan. We're hoping to have an updated draft by the time that we reach our board. We do a board retreat where we all get together over a weekend and try to hash out things. So we're hoping to have a draft done by that, which is mid March, and then we would open, once our draft is complete, we would open everything for public comment, and so we would then be reaching out with our draft then. So we'll be getting the survey out, we'll be looking at drafting things, and we're hoping to have by the summer, by mid to late summer, everything completed for this is, I feel like, what our current goals are. Andy, does that sound about correct? Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, I will conclude the advisory meeting